the grueling schedule that you're dealing with, what was your actual schedule?
Sometimes we'd go 2 weeks or 3 weeks straight and then go home for 2 or 3 days. Oftentimes there was runs that were definitely 2 weeks long. We do a loop somewhere, like we'd fly into Newark, New Jersey, and do the New York cities, and then a couple of, like Philadelphia and Scranton and all those, and come back around to Newark again, fly out and not go home, go to another centralized city and do a loop there, get the rental cars and drive around there and do a bunch of house shows. And then sometimes they would plant 3 days of TV in the middle of there somewhere, so we really wouldn't go home. And then finally we'd get to go home for 2 days or 3 days, just long enough to get your laundry done and maybe take a nap. That's what I would say. Of course, not me. I'd go home and keep partying because I wasn't married and I didn't have kids. So I was living the rock star life on the road and at home, unfortunately.
I was gonna ask you that because I've now talked to many wrestlers of coming home and being like, "You're want to hang out with your kids or your wife, and then you are on the couch and you're just like half
Yeah.
asleep, and they're like, 'Oh, daddy, throw the ball with me, play dolls,' and you're like, 'I can't even move, like
Yeah.
my body,' and you're at a different situation altogether. So I guess positive coming home and not having to deal with someone poking you in the face, going, 'Play with me, daddy,' but at the same time,
You're
a lot of
wore
wrestlers
out.
have
It's still
suffered.
brutal.
Yeah. And so you told them you wanted to go home, and they said, "Well, then go home." And so what does that mean? They fired you?
Yeah, they sent me home in the middle of a contract. Basically what was happening is when I re-signed the 1 year deal and got that feud with Triple H. That's why they gave it to me, to keep me and re-sign me for the extra year rollover. But as soon as I signed it, they did the deal. We did the deal with Triple H, and they immediately had him do a 20-second job to the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 12, and also immediately put him with Mark Marrow. And I just went back to losing to all the new heels that came in.
Mhm.
The only difference now is I had shorter hair and I was still a baby face. And so I was getting frustrated, and periodically I'd have these little powwow sessions with me and Vince McMahon and Jerry Briscoe standing out in a hallway somewhere, and I would express my disgust, with how they were using me. And I remember a couple times I said, if you're not going to use me any better, this is the shit I said to Vince McMahon. I said, if you're not going to use me any better than this, just send me home. And I remember he would always be like, he would pause for a second, like he couldn't believe I said that shit to him. And believe me, I was not in the right frame of mind. At that point, I was using drugs. I was injured. My back was hurt. I started doing tons of painkillers. And like I said, I was always the first guy at the bar. And I was just erratic in my
Mhm.
behavior. And I was really frustrated. And I felt like I was ready to just leave. And then one day he just, actually, what he said first was he was going to send me to Memphis to develop as a heel. And he was going to pay me $1,000 a week, which the hilarious thing is that was a lot more money than they were paying me at the time because they had me off the road most of the time and I wasn't really booked. And but I think my response is what got me sent home. I said I'm going to need that in writing, and it looked like Vince bit a turd. He just kind of looked at me like, absolutely. But then, like a week later, Jerry Briscoe's walking up to me in the locker room saying, "Nah, Vince said you can go on home." And I just remember going, "It's over. Can't
Wow.
believe it." Yeah. So that's
That's
how it kind of went down in a nutshell.
But are you still under contract when they send you home, or they like
They
this
sent
put
me
you?
home. I just signed that year, so I think I had like 6 or 8 months left on that contract. A contract of nothing. I mean, it's like
Oh, the
10.
guaranteed of you have to work for us.
Basically, it was you were an independent contractor, and all they guaranteed you each year was 10 matches at $150 each, and I had already reached that. I had gotten past the $1,500 mark at that point, but yeah, so they sent me home, and I basically couldn't work for anybody else until the contract was up, and it didn't matter anyway, man. I went home to a shitstorm of drugs and alcohol anyway, and just drowned myself in that whirlwind of shit. and for a while, and yeah, that's how it kind of went down. You know, there was a lot of drug addicts and alcoholics in the wrestling business, but at least when you were on the road, it was a controlled environment. They were pointing you and telling you where do you need to be here at this time, you need to be there at this time, you need to be. Once I went home and I wasn't booked anymore, there wasn't anybody telling me where to be or when. It went off the rails real quick. So, but yeah, that's kind of how it fell apart.
Interesting. Now, do you find that when you went home that a lot of wrestlers have the same situation with you is once they're off the road, well, there is no more road. So there's only the other parts of the road left. And that's you went home and you were living the rock star life, but in your house.
Yeah, and I didn't have any money or anything to show for it, so I was pretty much broke almost immediately. And I had this hefty drug problem, so I had to figure out, ways and means to get money and get drugs. And I started bouncing in strip clubs and shit like that. It was just ridiculous. And yeah, it was just bad. It was bad for a while, several years.
So when you're working at the WWF, you don't have to tell me exact numbers, but like so let's go with 94 to 90 to like 96. What do you throw out a ballpark number? What is coming into your wallet? Are you spending it on the road, or are you pocketing some of this and hoping in like not going and buying Lamborghinis?
I I couldn't afford Lamborghinis if I
Okay.
wanted to, but I was not saving money. Um, you know, I think the first couple years I barely broke even with we paid our own road expenses. And remember, we were independent contractors, so
Yes.
we filled out a 1099 at the end of the year and we got to claim, our rental cars and hotels and food and stuff like that. Anything we spent pretty much on the road as expenses, we got to take, right off of our taxes. But still, even that being said, I really made almost no money.
Wow.
Vince knew when he had somebody that he could starve, and he knew, you know, like I said, I was a mark walking in the door. Well, he saw me 10 miles away coming, and I think that influenced how he paid me in those first couple of years. But plus, I think they're going to test you for the first 2 or 3 years anyway, and they're going to kind of starve you and see how your attitude is, and make you work for it. And unfortunately, I think some of those tests I failed in the end, but uh, it wasn't. Times were lean then anyway. Money was way down for most everybody. Like I said, there was the haves and the have-nots, and I definitely wasn't on the big money list. There was a lot of us workhorses on the undercard that would, on a nightly basis, kill ourselves for scraps, basically.
Wow. Most likely because they're thinking, hey, he's a wrestling fan. He's in the WWF, the number one company in the world. He's gonna be there. But obviously, eventually, like a lot of wrestlers, they get cut. And once they get cut, that lifestyle that they were living is still intact, but the wrestling world is no longer there, unfortunately, for a lot of people. So yeah, July 13th, 1996 was your last match in the WWF. You took on TL Hopper, Garbage Man versus Toilet Man. So you know, I gotta say, I've always enjoyed both characters, but obviously yours a lot more than the sounds of a toilet flushing was his music. Toilet
And that
flushing.
was symbolic of my career at the time. And
Oh,
I remember I was such a professionally, I was such a beaten person. I was beaten down and I was just sick of it and ready to go. And I remember Tony Anthony, TL Hopper, came up to me before our match. And of course, I was doing a job for him. And he goes, "Would it be okay if I stuck the plunger in your mouth?" And now I don't know how many guys would have agreed to that. But I just, at that point, just remember going, "God, what the hell else could they do to me at this point? Just go ahead, man." I was just like, why not? Add insult to injury. Why not? And that's kind of how I went out. Yeah, with
oh,
a plunger in my mouth.
wow.